All right, so this is a video for on thesis statements, and specifically what I call a 7-point thesis statement, or a 6 or 7-point thesis statement, depending on how we do some of the interpreting of that. First, so let's just talk through basics on the thesis statement. I get that this is a really common topic for people to cover. I think I add a little more depth to it. If not, hooray, go find a cool worksheet from some writing center somewhere. But this is how I view it. You've already hopefully watched stuff on my 8 aspects of writing, or have been familiar with it if you're seeing me, or if you randomly Googled this or something, go look at those videos. This will make a little more sense, but not much. Suffice to say that the reason thesis statements are important is they ultimately perform multiple functions. So a thesis statement may be taught. It's taught in almost every writing class that I've ever seen or heard of. By almost every writing instructor addresses it somehow. So thesis statements are essentially are supposed to perform multiple functions. They often act as the main guiding statement for your essay, but the reason we spend so much time on them is because they actually have a cross-section of functions for the essay, and so they are a high-stakes kind of inflection point or key moment in your text. If you watch one of my other videos, I talk about this is the point where you essentially, if you were asking someone on a date, this is the thing you have to say to get them to say yes. So you want to make sure that that makes that how you frame that really important. As far as thesis statements go, they are often taught in 3 ways. First, as a thesis statement, people say should be a main claim, and this is especially so it should make some sort of main claim, clear statement, not just simple reporting, and it should establish the main purpose of whatever you're writing, of your essay and whatnot. So whether it's a claim, whether it's an argument-based paper, if it's some other genre and it's supposed to be a report, it's supposed to establish the purpose somehow. So this means that it's performing a rhetorical function. We've talked about rhetoric, or I've talked about rhetoric in other videos as being not just persuasiveness, because you can have a variety of genres, but essentially how a writer accomplishes his or her writerly purpose. So a thesis statement has a rhetorical function in that it establishes what your purpose for that piece of writing or that essay is. If it's reporting, it needs to be really specific and clear what you're going to talk about and why you're going to talk about it. So that is often one way that we are told, or one thing we're supposed to think about with a thesis statement. Other people teach thesis statements as like 3-pronged thesis statements or something like that, essentially saying that the thesis signals the organization of the essay. Here's point 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, however many points, it's not always 3, but that there's a signaling of structure or a signposting ahead. And so we see the thesis statement performing a structural function as well as that previously mentioned rhetorical function of establishing purpose. So those are 2 of our 8 aspects in my model on writing, already overlapped in a single part or moment of your essay. So you want to make sure that you're aware of the importance here. Other times we are told that thesis statements should be deep, should be critical, should help us understand not just what's happening in a text or what you want to say about it, but why it matters and what kind of impact might be happening in this thing that you're talking about. So you don't just say, I'm going to talk to you about snorkels, and that be an effective or deeply critical key statement. It does establish the structural function and purpose of, or partial purpose of, so rhetorically and structurally, but it doesn't really get a whole lot of depth. So when we want thesis statements to do that deep critical thinking work, that's really an analytical function. So thesis statements are important for a variety of reasons, some of which are because they often perform a rhetorical function at the same time they're performing a structural function, at the same time they're performing an analytical function. And because they often deal with, they're often best framed using compound complex sentences, you also have to be aware of the sociocultural grammar norms of comma usage, or just think about the syntactic structure, which is both sociocultural and linguistic. So suffice to say, the reason the thesis statement has so much emphasis in so many writing classrooms, and why teachers try and attack it in a variety of ways and want to see it all the time, is because we're really hitting on at least 5 of the 8 aspects of writing, and that's a big deal. That shows the emphasis from a variety of perspectives for this one part of writing. So I want to talk to you about what I call the 7-point thesis statement model. This is how we get a deeply critical, analytical thesis statement. Your thesis statement should still establish your purpose, should still signal structure ahead. But this part is the one that sometimes people struggle with. And then, so let me just talk you through it. So first, I have 7 points, but I break them into 3 categories. First, the basic identifying elements or basic information of whatever you're studying. And so if you are studying a specific text, a specific novel, a specific movie, a specific video, you want to make sure you name that text. It is not an uncommon thing for writers to just jump right in, and because they're responding to an assignment that's, they know that the prompt establishes, the assignment from the teacher establishes, I'd like you to write an essay about, Shakespeare's Macbeth, or Avengers, or something like that, or the song, can't think of one right now, This Is America by Childish Gambino. Like, if that is already set up in the assignment that the student's responding to, or that the writer's responding to, they may not think they need to restate that, but you should. Writers should. Because if you want to imagine, your essay as its own standalone text, not in the sense of not just a response to someone else's assignment, but something that if you took it out of the classroom context and say tried to go and get it published in a newspaper, in a magazine, in a journal of some kind, that it would actually read as if it were professional. That's kind of what you want. Maybe you see it as an op-ed piece, a letter to an editor kind of thing. That can help you frame it. So you have to name those basic identifying elements of the text. The title, the genre, the creator, if it's an actual text. If it's a text is a single piece of communication written by an author or group of authors, and you have to name that to at least set the bare minimum thing. If you're not writing about William Shakespeare's play Macbeth as performed by some you pick, then if you're doing a more topical essay, you still want to get to the specific things. If your assignment says write about slavery in the American colonies, you don't just say, I want to talk to you about slavery. You often are supposed to be picking something that zooms in to a specific piece of that. So often instructors will set broad parameters so each student can kind of find their lens in. If your instructor set very specific parameters, all the more reason to make sure that what you say is very specific in response. So that gets us through that first section. You need to name the basic information of the text. The second section has to do with methods, and so then methods and madness. Methods are more tangible and more obvious, but they're kind of starting to shift into analysis. You are doing some interpretive work. It's just not as deep yet. But usually 0.4 or 0.5, depending on how you frame it, is still kind of reporting with a soft analysis. So you might, if you're talking about the Great Gatsby, we get through those first 3 points saying, in the 20th century novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald, in the 20th century novel, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. That gets us through the first 3, comma. That's our introductory clause, right? What's happening? The motif of green appears throughout the novel, and how does it appear, or why does it appear throughout the novel as in scenes of longing, right? I'm kind of putting it together as I go. The why might be to reinforce the struggles of the Roaring Twenties and the Nouveau Riche in this era of U.S. society. And then that might end the sentence, or you might go colon. However, as we read this, the green light also affects the audience, leading them to a place where they can see the emptiness of the upper class internal politic. Period. So that is a complex, deep thesis statement. I threw it together in this moment. Apologies. I really should have examples, but sorry. But that hits on all 7 points. I could also do it for the giving tree, but I don't want to have people get mad at me just yet. That tends to be a more controversial topic. Shel Silverstein, it's a good story, but it has a very deep and disturbing alternate message that you may not have intended. Anyways, I still think you're cool. With that, we have these 3 categories. We need to name the basic information. We need to say what's happening in the text. We need to say how it's happening. And so I kind of the model I just gave you with Great Gatsby, that's actually really doing more of a literary analysis thesis statement, but I have my students write very different papers from that. So they actually might write on a database text for a math course or something like that, but they still might say, okay, in the YouTube video by gamer person 73 titled Math in League of Legends, something's happening, right? And so you want to use these 7 points as a way to pull together your main thought and all the key information, all the big umbrella information of your essay. And you can do this in 1 sentence or 2. It's usually best to use complex compound sentences, but you definitely, in a traditional humanities-based paper, that happens at the bottom of the introductory paragraph where this is showing up. In other contexts, that might be split up or distinguished, but that's, I think I have in another video. Another option is, if I tell students to write about a writing culture, they may not have a specific text or title of a text, perhaps, but maybe something they could do. I've had students study a chemistry classroom before, so they may say, in the Chem 151, in the college chemistry 151 course taught by Brian Woodrum at Chandler Gilbert Community College, writing appears through the presence of the periodic table and chemical reactions to reinforce the specific naming systems and knowledge practices of the chemistry discipline. Brian does it in this way. He reinforces these pieces of knowledge through his lectures effectively in specific ways. The students appear to respond positively as he teaches them the core fundamentals of chemistry nomenclature through those forms of writing. And so that may be the thesis statement, and to get at that data maybe further on in the essay, they talk about the rhetoric of the periodic table or the knowledge base that's embedded in its visual design. They may even have done surveys on students from that classroom, and that's the data that reinforces the 0.7 where they say the students respond this way. But that's kind of how you might apply it in another context where the text isn't your traditional text. Where the definition of a text is really more broad, kind of text as in the root for textile or manufactured thing. And so then anything that's been crafted for a purpose could be described as a text that we could analyze. And so if you've got something that's a kind of a complex text like this, where you're looking at something a little amorphous, a little hard to pin down, you can still follow this model. You just have to think a little harder about what counts as a title for this type of text, if broadly defined. In other contexts, if you are if you're talking about a specific topic, you may not have you may have a topic but not a specific text or author or creator. It may just be a phenomenon you're trying to understand. It's kind of hard, if you're doing a political issue and you want to talk about immigration, it might be hard to pin down who the, if you don't want to talk about a specific text, but it's kind of more of an argumentative essay, you may not just want to say, we're going to discuss immigration, though naming it would be good. You could at least be more specific and say immigration in the U.S. Between, in the 21st century, because that limits your scope and helps us understand what the essay is going to be about. And then you can say what's happening, how's it happening, why is it happening, and how are people being affected, or how's it changing the way culture operates or political systems operate, or it depends on what classroom or what context you're writing into. But that might be one way to change it, and that then it becomes more of a 5 or 6 point thesis because the basic identifying elements have been condensed down. So that is my take on the thesis statements, using the 8 aspects as an analytical lens, and also trying to establish an analytical model to still accomplish the rhetorical and structural purposes of a thesis statement, but also make sure we're getting to a depth that is something our readers are going to be intrigued by. One of the benefits to having a deep thesis statement from the very beginning is it actually can hold you accountable to push deeper in the paragraphs, so that you're not just generically doing broad strokes arguments by saying, I want to talk about immigration, and then it's really big. Here's the Republican perspective, and here's the Democratic perspective, and here's the world perspective, kind of thing. Instead, by focusing maybe specifically on immigration from the lens of the refugee, the current president of the United States, and the majority leader of the Senate. That anchors and gets more specific. So with that, there's a benefit to pushing deep early on, like this, because it sets an expectation for your reader, and it sets an expectation for yourself as you go to produce this writing. By having a complex thesis, you've already done some of the deeper legwork to get you moving toward deeper thought in that deeper part, in that body part of your essay. All right, so with that is my take on a thesis statement. I call it the 7-point thesis statement, and those are some of the functions we see and why thesis statements are important. Hopefully you find this helpful. Enjoy. If you're one of my students, this will also make up for if I rushed in class because it got cut short. These things do happen. All right, have fun and enjoy your weekend.